Percent of the time, I have no idea what I'm talking about.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
It's not. It
gets the people going.
You are now listening to Diagnonsense.
Then we would just be idiots saying nonsense.
With Kurt Honack.
Damn it.
And Isaac Smolden.
I am also here.
I don't even know how we do this anymore. I guess I silence my phone first.
Yep.
It has just been so long because we've both been doing stuff and working.
That's right.
And you're just like flying solo most days as a client navigator out there driving around the Matsu Valley.
Yep.
Doing what you need to be doing.
Flying around, burning rubber.
Yeah. And I'm a TikToker now / radio host. So
yeah. TikToker. That's right.
Yeah.
I do see you on there.
TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Facebook Reels. Check it out. My House Matsu.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to Diagnonsense. I'm Isaac Smolden, and I'm joined by Kurt Honack.
Hey,
Kurt,
buddy.
How you doing today? I'm so
good.
excited that we get to record a podcast.
I know.
It has been too long. You've been doing school?
Yeah.
Finished the semester? School's going good?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then it's a little dreary today, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's been a pretty decent start to the summer, and that's okay. And I gave you some reading material over the weekend when it was super bright and sunny, and you, I'm guessing, stayed inside in your darkened room.
In my dungeon.
And you
so here's the deal is I audio booked it because I had just been through 512 pages of an esotericism read. And I've never read esotericism before, like studies on that. So I couldn't do another like where I was sitting. So I hope you forgive me because
I guess we'll give you a pass. I did randomly say like, hey, do you want to record a podcast? And also here's 300 pages. Please read this by Tuesday.
By Tuesday, yeah.
So audiobook's all right.
I was listening, yeah.
I read it on the plane.
It was narrated very well on the audiobook though.
Good. We're talking about Extreme Ownership, which is by Jocko, Willink, and Leif Babin, who are 2 U.S. Navy SEALs. They have their own podcast. I guess the views expressed in their podcast are not necessarily the views of My House Matsu or its board or staff or anyone. Before anyone looks up everything that the 2 authors I just said have ever done, I've never listened to their podcast. I just read this book, and I really like this book, actually. Yeah. I thought it was very, very applicable. We were talking about this yesterday with some of the staff, but I think no matter where you're at in your life, like in your interactions with a coworker or a subordinate or a spouse or a partner or a friend or a random person on the street, I think that there's a lot of really good lessons that you can take from Extreme Ownership. If you don't want to listen to the rest of this podcast, the way that we summed it up was, it's all your fault. What are you going to do to fix it? Which is, I think, funny, but also probably a little bit of an oversimplification. I think what I like about this book is it's not, sometimes we have these reading assignments and it's like, kind of a self-help genre type thing.
Right.
And it can get a little bit tedious after a couple of chapters.
Yeah.
But these guys talk a lot about their experiences in, I think they were in Afghanistan, right? During
Iraq.
Or were they in Iraq?
Yeah.
Okay, so early 2000s Iraq, and they talk a lot about their experiences over there, and then they use that to I think they've been in kind of like the program development side of things for a while, so they'll tell a story about their time over in the Middle East, then they'll tell a story about their time helping someone in the business world, and then they'll kind of lay out like the lessons and how this idea of extreme ownership over every decision that you make. I really think that with the work that we do here, it's less about competition, but just the idea of the self-evaluation portions of these lessons I find really, really, really helpful, because it immediately made me shift my thinking with what we're doing here, what I'm doing here. Like if something goes wrong or if something happens that I don't like, or someone in my perception like messes up, I think what this really helps me with is the first question I'm asking is not what they did wrong. It's how could I have communicated better, or give an instruction better or set the expectations better so that we didn't arrive at this outcome.
Right. I mean, the title of the book is Extreme Ownership, and there's a lot of, you look at it as a leadership book, but what I liked about it is it teaches you how to follow very well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to lead, you have to know how to follow.
Yeah.
And so it's this dynamic that you have to be able to do.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that.
Yeah, 100%. I think, they talk about that in the book too, kind of dealing with higher ups. You're right in that it's kind of marketed as a leadership book, and there's certainly a lot of lessons you can take from it as a leader, but it also allows you to, it does talk about that dealing with, maybe a superior in the sense of, if you're taking responsibility for something, sometimes your leader tells you to do something and you're like, well, I don't agree with that. That's stupid. But if you're looking at it from a sense of extreme ownership, it's okay, maybe I don't agree with this decision, or maybe I don't understand this decision. But the first question is, what can I do to execute this to the best of my abilities? And so when you frame it from that lens, it's like, okay, here's what I've been told to do. Maybe I'm going to offer this suggestion, or I'm going to try to carry this out in a way that helps the people under me or furthers the mission of the organization. But ultimately, I've been told to get this done. How are we going to find a way to get this done? I think that's really great for what we do, because a lot of times we really have to expand that other duties as assigned section of our job description. And sometimes when you're helping homeless and at-risk youth, there's something that needs to happen, and it's above and beyond the call of duty. But when we're talking about our clients, it's like, what's going to be in the best interest of our client? Sometimes what's in the best interest of our client is not fun for us and requires sacrifice. But when you start from that point of, this is what needs to happen, I'm going to find a way to make it happen that's going to be the best for the client, and then also is, the best way to accomplish it for me, my mental health, any subordinates you may have, any coworkers you may have. It really puts things in perspective, I think, when we're asked to do something in our field.
Yeah, when I was reading this, it's definitely got, and maybe it's not so much about the idea about leading and following as much as it's kind of a warrior culture. It reminded me of the Book of Five Rings, and talking about in Japan during the feudal era. And because I really like because we read Atomic Habits too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I think you read that too. Yeah. And where you're breaking things down into smaller and smaller steps until it's manageable. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, right? Because you hear psychologists like Jordan Peterson talking about how do you deal with a huge problem in your life? Well, you have to break it down until you have a manageable piece that you can face. Right. And so whether it's psychology or whether it's, whatever activity it is, right. It's like, okay, how do we start from the smallest thing? And I really like that because, the kind of the Zen kind of philosophy in Five Rings. And I think it's the, Taoist, I think, kind of religious influences where, because this guy was an undefeated samurai, and I forget his name. I'll have to Google him real quick. But he's like an undefeated samurai, and he had all this, he wrote this book. And it reminds me a lot of that, because you're letting go of what you cannot manage and really, he kind of cut through okay, first thing about combat, it's simple, don't overcomplicate
and that's
it.
one of the chapters in this book, right? It's called Simple.
Right.
And they talk about how the more complicated you make a plan, the more failure points there are, the more likely it is that something is going to go wrong, right? No plan survives contact with the enemy. And the way they have this broken down, early on, I think, when we're talking about checking ourselves, the first 4 chapters are under the part 1 of winning the war within. So it's stuff like no bad teams, only bad leaders, right? Believing, checking your ego. The laws of combat, they really lean into some of their experiences as Navy SEALs, talking about, like, the chapter titles are Cover and Move, Simple, Prioritize, and Execute. And that's kind of what you're talking about when you're talking about that warrior mentality. But the way that, like, prioritizing and executing translates as kind of a one-to-one in your daily life at work or at home is really fascinating to me, because they're talking about it. They're starting from the baseline of, like, we have to clear this house. Like, this is the steps that we're going to take to clear this house of the enemy. But you can take all that their whole step-by-step process and do it in your daily life in a way that I think has really been transformative for me since after reading the book a couple of weeks ago already, like, just the way that I approach like my day-to-day habits and stuff.
Yeah, totally. I'm listening. I'm between work and but no.
Kurt's on the navigation phone right now. Did I mention that Kurt is the only navigator today? This is why we haven't gotten an episode in 2 months.
Right. Moyamoto Musashi, I think is how you pronounce his name. And he's the Book of Five Rings. So I read that a while ago. I got a really nice this one with the red. It's got like this kind of red velvety on it. But it reminded me of that because he talks about it's because, like, in the and it's got like artistic they like added context to it, because, like, in feudal Japan they talked about, like, because people didn't know, it was kind of like you're a constant in this ebb and flow of combat between civilization, and so people, that kind of simplicity made life a lot better, or it made you able to respond to chaos better. Right. So,
if you're a samurai, I don't know how the rank and file thought about the feudal Japanese system, but
I like that. I read that, and I think that translates in like, for example, like when you're approaching things, and they seem too chaotic to manage. You have to start somewhere with it, right? And simple is better sometimes, and just making a move, is sometimes that's better than having to trying to think about all the things that could go wrong or doing them, and then okay, once you take action, and he talks about in there, like, then you evaluate, and then you do the best that you can with the information that you have.
It's kind of like cleaning a messy room. Like, if your room is a pigsty and you're like, okay, I have to clean my room, but you just try to, like, pick a piece up here and pick a piece up here, and you don't have a plan of attack going in, you just get burned out so quickly because you're not seeing the mess go away. Whereas if you break it down and, like, okay, here's my messy room. Okay, well, my laundry is all over my bed. Okay, so I'm going to start by folding all my laundry and putting my laundry away. Okay, now that my laundry's clear, I can make the bed. Okay, well, now I've got a clear bed at least. Now I'm going to go tackle the junk that's on the dresser. Now I'm going to clean up the trash. Now I'm going to vacuum, and you break it down into these pieces. All of a sudden, you have a manageable problem instead of this giant crisis, right? Yep. We've been talking with a lot of clients, like in program and stuff, about budgeting. It's come up in, like, the Facebooks, and it's been kind of a theme of, we have a lot of folks that I think are really struggling with that ideal of budgeting, because it's anytime you're dealing with money, it's a very scary, daunting project to have to take on.
It's
right?
overwhelming if you've never had it.
Right. But if you break it down into pieces, right? If you're like, okay, well, I know that maybe I'm not going to say this is my food budget for the month. Maybe it's, well, this is what I know I want to eat this week, and let me plan out all these meals. Well, okay, if I break down these meals into this is how much it costs, well, now I have, this piece, and then I can build on that piece. If I know, well, my rent is this much, that's a constant. I know my rent's going to be this much. Well, okay, well, then that's a piece of my budget. Like, right. That's, and you start to break it down, and then that uncertainty that comes from, well, what if my electric bill is $10 more? What if food is $10 more this month? it's because you have it compartmentalized, it's a lot easier to kind of attack this big scary concept, right?
Yeah, much more manageable.
Yeah. So that idea.
So
is really
I think
important.
what he's trying to say, and some of that is that between both authors, is that you are trying to make it manageable at the same time you're taking action, and the more you do that, the
I believe
easier it gets.
The chapter that specifically covers that is Cover and Move.
Yeah.
Is the name of the chapter. They're talking about we're moving, we're getting to our objective, but we're also laying down cover fire at the same time. Like our team is working together, and that is, making sure that the whole squad, in the case of the story that they were talking about to illustrate that, is staying safe because everyone's doing their job and we're able to work through this problem while also, doing what we need to do to make sure that everyone's going to make it back to base alive.
I really appreciated the pieces about so even in the first chapter, right, he's talking about maximizing personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going off my notes here, but so getting that to me is such an awesome thing as like a peer support, because I exercise that to some degree. It's like in order to have mutual trust, it's part of like taking extreme ownership, right? You have to start out your relationship with, okay, how do I take maximum responsibility and exercise as much trust as I can realistically have with somebody, because oftentimes I think it's really easy for us to not exercise any trust, and that doesn't build mutual trust. And so part of having peer support relationships is just being vulnerable enough to for people to feel like they can be their true selves, right? And so that's applicable though all the way up to your workplace relationships and professional,
right?
Where it's life and death situation though, which is cool because it's like that's not the situation's not cool, but what I'm saying is that's scalable.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of scalable. I like how everything in this book is scalable.
Mm-hmm.
Feels scalable.
100%. And what else I like is, that idea of you have a subordinate or you have a coworker and something goes wrong. You ask them to do something and it doesn't happen. And earlier I said, okay, so the first thing I'm framing from is what could I have done better to make sure that what I needed you to do happened, or how could I have communicated better? And that you don't want to use that as, oh, I'm always the fall guy. Like, oh, you sat on your butt for 2 days and we missed this deadline. I guess I should have just really communicated, it's not, right. It doesn't mean that it's all,
it doesn't mean
that oversimplification of it's all your fault. What are you going to do to fix it? Like that, that is a little pedantic, because you're not letting everyone off the hook. But what it allows you to do is, okay, I'm going to start with what I could have done better. But because I've taken that moment, now what I'm left with is, this is what I could have done better. But here is, here's all the stuff that happened that I couldn't control. And for you, that is, it's a relief, and it takes a lot of weight off your shoulders, because you're like, here's what I could have done better, but here's what just happened that had really nothing to do with me, and I don't have to own that, right?
Right.
And then the other thing that allows you to do is, if you're giving corrective feedback or constructive criticism, and goes, here's what I could have done. Now I'm going to get, you're starting with yourself, and you give that other person the opportunity to say, or to see, oh, here's, I dropped the ball too. Here's what I could have done, or here's what else happened. This piece of what happened is my fault. And sometimes, you say, okay, here's what I could have done. Here's what the other person could have done. And here's something that just happened that's out of our control. And there's nothing that we could have done about that. So what are we going to do next time to account for that factor?
Yeah.
Or it's kind of back to that idea of compartmentalization. It lets you break down everything into manageable sections of this is why this went wrong, or this is why this went right. And what really led to that? What pieces were important for that?
Yeah.
What do we need to repeat?
And that's part of the reason that's conducive to a teamwork relationship, is because if you don't realistically set if you're not realistic about your expectations and your capabilities, then it's hard to be realistic about your teammates' expectations and capabilities, right? Because it's got to be mutual. It's got to be this mutual kind of ebb and flow with the relationship. And so, yeah, I totally see that.
I want to touch on one more piece out of here, and it's towards the end, about the dichotomy of leadership. It's a really cool kind of like dogma. It reminds me of like a psalm or a proverb, something like that from the Bible, or like a Sun Tzu thing, but kind of in a modern context. And I almost want to print this out and put it somewhere so I could see it. They have all these kind of axioms about the dichotomy of leadership, and they ended up writing a whole nother book that touches on all these points that I'm actually working through right now. But it's this really interesting, it's an interesting thought exercise in hearing it out loud and kind of thinking about what are the applications of this. So they say, a good leader, the dichotomy of leadership, a good leader must be confident but not cocky. They must be courageous but not foolhardy. They must be competitive but a gracious loser. They must be attentive to details but not obsessed by them. They have to be strong but have endurance. They have to be a leader and a follower, something that you were talking about earlier. They have to be humble but not passive, aggressive but not overbearing, quiet but not silent, calm but not robotic, logical but not devoid of emotions, close with they say troops, but I guess coworkers or teammates, however you're applying this, close with the troops, but not so close that one becomes more important than another or more important than the good of the team, and not so close that they forget who is in charge. Able to execute extreme ownership while exercising decentralized command.
Yeah.
Which is it's one of those things that maybe sounds easy in concept, or there's aspects of it that maybe come more, but it's more easily to some than others.
A fine art than it is,
right?
Than it is like,
right.
Yeah.
This is something that I have thought that really stuck with me, and I've thought a lot about, especially working through their next book where they kind of expand on all of this stuff. It's a lot of times when we talk about like the self-help type of stuff, or these habits that we want to do, these character defects maybe that we have that we want to work on, it's important to remember that too much of anything is not always a good thing, right? And so that idea, I think for me, competitive but a gracious loser is one that I know that I struggle with. But a couple bullet points down, they talk about humble but not passive. And so there's always this push and pull that you have to be thinking of. If I'm so obsessed with working on being more of a gracious loser, but then I'm not willing to, now I've worked on humility, right, and now I've become too passive to where I can't take advantage of anything or take credit for anything or build on my momentum. Like it's a fine balance. It's a fine balance. It can derail you too. So that, I don't know. I really, really enjoyed this read. I think, like we were talking about at the beginning, I think that no matter where you are in life, if you're in high school and you're playing team sports or you're getting ready for college, or if you're 70 years old and you're retired, I think that this can be applicable in all contexts, with your family, with your teammates, with your coworkers, your subordinates, how you interact with your bosses. You listen to it. Yeah. I read it on the plane and I kind of just burned through it. Like it's a very easy read in that there is kind of like Opium War, actually, where there is cool story stuff that you're reading about that tricks you into learning something. Another book that's like that is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which is one I'd like to talk about on the podcast. But yeah, I don't know. Extreme ownership. This is not a sponsored segment, but give it a read. I really liked it.
Yeah, no, I thought it had a lot of good stuff in there. I'm trying to see, is there anything that we missed that there's a lot of good. I think that's really valuable for young people who, instead of learning this stuff when you get
mess up.
into, yeah, well, maybe not mess up, but before you get into, these positions where you have more complicated, more responsibility, more complicated relationships, whether it's with business or whatever. Yeah, I mean those are good things to know.
Yeah, before you're a spouse, before you're a supervisor, before you're working in some organization where you have 5 different departments that you're trying to interface with.
It's a pretty solid. Yeah. Because I've learned those as soft lessons in working human services and I think in my own experience, but those were soft lessons learned through hard situations that you like to prevent that from happening. And so what's really cool about reading something like that is that you're getting that without having to make those sacrifices before So yeah, I thought it was a solid read.
Yeah, or a solid listen if you're listening on audiobook. Like Kurt. I guess we will wrap up so Kurt can get back to doing his job, and I can get back to doing whatever I do. I think we're doing a barbecue later today. I'll probably record more TikToks. Yeah, more TikToks for the people. You know what's funny about those is the sandwich eating TikToks and Facebook Reels. Way more engagement.
That's because
people love watching me eat sandwiches.
People want to. What's that genre of content where
mukbang?
Mukbang.
The My House Mukbang podcast coming to you in 2025? Question mark? Extreme ownership. It's everything is your fault first. How are you going to do better?
Not a bad place to start.
Not a bad place to start.